Ray Tobin's hand found Lucas Bishop's wrist with a strength that didn't match the rest of him. Fingers thin and trembling, knuckles swollen with arthritis the cancer hadn't bothered to wait for. The oxygen line beneath his nose hissed faintly with each labored breath, and the numbers on the monitor beside his bed had been dropping, slowly, all week. "Don't let them take my dog," he said, and then the rest of the sentence broke apart into something closer to weeping than speech. Outside the hospice room's window, a white county animal control truck was already idling in the parking lot, its driver checking a clipboard against the room number taped to the door. Duke, the German shepherd lying pressed against Ray's hip on top of the hospital blanket, lifted his graying muzzle and let out a low sound that wasn't quite a growl, watching the truck through the glass like he already understood exactly what it had come for. Lucas had walked into this room 4 minutes earlier, expecting a routine therapy visit, with his own dog, Rex, sitting quietly at his side. He had not expected to be the only person standing between a dying veteran and the county taking the only thing he had left to hold on to. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from tonight in the comments below. If a story like this moves you, stay with us until the very end, because what this Marine was about to do in the next 10 minutes is the kind of thing that restores your faith in people, and we read every single comment you leave. Lucas Bishop was 41 years old, lean rather than broad, built with the kind of wiry, durable strength that had outlasted 2 decades of work most men's bodies didn't survive intact. He stood 5'10" with close-cropped gray-flecked hair and a face that had weathered into something steady rather than hard. His hands carried old calluses, the permanent kind, and a faded tattoo on his right forearm marked the unit he had served with for 16 years. His eyes were a clear, pale blue, the kind people tended to describe as kind before they noticed how completely they took in a room. The eyes of a man who had spent most of his career reading the smallest signals a dog or a person gave off before either of them said a word out loud. He was not unfriendly. He simply moved through the world with the quiet patience of a man who had learned that most crises did not respond to volume. Nothing about him suggested urgency until urgency was actually required, and then very little about him suggested anything else. He carried himself the way handlers carry themselves long after they have stopped working, economical, watchful, with the contained gentleness of someone who had spent his whole career being trusted by creatures that could not explain themselves and had decided somewhere along the way that the trust deserved to be earned every single time. Lucas had served 16 years in the Marine Corps as a military working dog handler, 3 deployments, 2 dogs of his own buried in the line of duty before his third partner, a Belgian Malinois named Koa, retired alongside him when his enlistment ended. He had taken a medical retirement after a training injury left permanent damage in his right knee, and he had come home to Millbrook, Ohio, with Koa, a pension, and very little idea what to do with a life that no longer had a partner who depended on him every hour of every day. Koa had died 2 winters ago, old age finally catching what 16 years of combat work hadn't, and Lucas had nearly stopped volunteering at the VA hospice altogether before a caseworker suggested he bring a different kind of partner instead. Rex, a retired police dog from the next county over, paired with him 8 months earlier through a program matching handlers with dogs who, like Lucas, had nowhere left to go that understood what they had given. Visiting dying veterans with Rex had become the only thing, since Koa, that made the quiet feel survivable. Rex was a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois, 60 pounds of lean, coiled muscle retired from 12 years split between municipal police work, and before that, an overseas contract Lucas had never gotten the full details of. His coat ran fawn and black across a narrow, alert face, and a small chunk missing from his left ear told a story Rex had no way of telling himself. He moved with the tight, economical precision of a dog who had spent his whole working life reading rooms for threats. But in hospice hallways, that same precision had become something gentler. A careful, deliberate stillness beside hospital beds. A habit of resting his head exactly where a patient's hand could reach it without effort. He had never once, in 8 months of visits, reacted to a sound that turned out to be nothing. He was reacting to one now, and so was the older dog lying across the bed in front of him. Millbrook Hospice sat on the quiet edge of town. A low brick building with wide hallways built for wheelchairs and a small courtyard garden most patients never made it outside to see. Late October light came in thin and gray through the blinds, and the building carried the particular hush of a place where time moved differently than it did anywhere else. Not slow. Exactly. Just measured, counted, attended to by people who understood that every hour mattered more than it used to. The hallway outside Ray's room smelt faintly of antiseptic, and, more faintly still, of the coffee the night nurses kept brewing for families who could not bring themselves to go home. Wade Pemberton was 43 years old and Ray Tobin's only living relative. A great-nephew who had not visited Ray once in the 11 years before the diagnosis, and had appeared within a week of learning the prognosis, was terminal. He held financial power of attorney, arranged hastily through a lawyer Ray had signed with during a frightened week after his first hospital admission, and Wade had used it efficiently, listing Ray's house with a realtor before Ray had even moved into hospice care, requesting an inventory of the estate's value from the lawyer twice in 1 month, and treating Duke, from the very first conversation, as a complication to be solved rather than a creature to be considered. He had told the hospice's intake coordinator plainly that he had no intention of taking the dog, that Duke was old and probably had health problems of his own, and that the cleanest solution was to have animal control collect him before Ray's death rather than after, so the house could be cleared and listed without delay. Millbrook Hospice's own policy, requiring a resident pet to be removed once no family member would commit to taking responsibility for it, gave Wade's request the cover of procedure rather than choice. He had signed the authorization form that morning without asking to see Duke first. Ray Tobin was 79 years old, a Vietnam veteran who had spent 2 tours with the Army's 39th Scout Dog Platoon, walking point through jungle that had killed better men than him because a dog 2 steps ahead had smelled the danger first. He had come home in 1971, worked 40 years at the county feed mill, and never fully stopped missing the particular kind of silent partnership he had once depended on to stay alive. 3 years ago, after his own German Shepherd of 12 years had died, a veterans program had matched him with Duke, a retired police K-9 with a bad hip, and a handler who had moved out of state. And the 2 of them had spent 3 years being exactly what the other one needed, without either of them having to explain it. Duke was 11 years old now, 68 pounds of graying black and tan fur with a stiff right hip and a soft, watchful patience that had only deepened as Ray's health declined. He had taken to sleeping pressed against Ray's side every night for the past 2 months, and the hospice nurses had stopped trying to move him off the bed weeks ago, because no one who had seen the 2 of them together had been able to bring themselves to try very hard. Lucas had Ray's hand still in his when the hospice's intake coordinator, a tired but not unkind woman named Diane Hess, knocked and stepped into the doorway. "Mr. Tobin, I'm sorry. The truck's here." She glanced at Lucas, clearly relieved someone else was in the room. Policy requires the animal be removed if family can't commit to ongoing care. Mr. Pemberton signed the authorization this morning. "He didn't ask me," Ray said, his voice cracking. "He didn't ask Duke." Lucas stood and kept his voice level, the way he had learned to keep it level in rooms a lot more dangerous than this one. "I need a few minutes before that truck takes anything. Can you hold them? I can ask. I can't promise long. Diane hesitated in the doorway. I'm sorry. This isn't how I wanted this to go either. Lucas found Wade Pemberton in the hospice lobby 10 minutes later, scrolling through his phone while a realtor's listing photos of Ray's house glowed on the screen. He didn't look up right away. "You're the dog guy," Wade said when he finally did. "Look, I get it. It's sad, but I'm not taking on a sick old dog with a hip problem. I've got a house to sell and a job 2 states away. It's not personal. He's not sick. He's old. There's a difference." Lucas kept his hands loose at his sides, the same posture he used with dogs that hadn't decided yet whether to trust him. "Your uncle's dying, Mr. Pemberton, and the only thing he's asked anyone for in the last 2 weeks is that his dog not be taken from him before he is. He's not my uncle. He's my great-uncle, and I barely know him." Wade's voice had the flat impatience of a man who considered the conversation already finished. "Look, if you want the dog, take him. I genuinely don't care what happens to him. I just need this handled today so the house can close on schedule." Behind Lucas, in the hallway, Rex had gone very still, watching Wade with the particular flat attention he reserved for people whose intentions hadn't matched their words from the first sentence. Lucas called Renee Castillo, the VA patient advocate he had worked with on a dozen hospice cases over the years, and explained the situation in the clipped, factual terms he still defaulted to under pressure. Renee told him what he already suspected, that hospice policy, while real, wasn't absolute, and that a patient's documented therapeutic need for a companion animal could, with the right paperwork and the right urgency, override a default removal in cases involving end-of-life care. "I need it today," Lucas said. "The truck's already here." "Then we move today," Renee said. She pulled Ray's chart within the hour and found what neither Lucas nor Ray had thought to mention out loud. Duke had been formally registered 18 months earlier as an emotional support animal by Ray's primary physician, specifically citing the documented benefit to Ray's anxiety and sleep during his cancer treatment. The paperwork existed. It had simply never been flagged when Wade signed the general removal authorization that morning, because no one on the administrative side had thought to cross-reference it. Renee called Millbrook Hospice's medical director directly, and within 40 minutes had what Lucas needed: a temporary hold on Duke's removal pending review, and a recommendation, pending Ray's written consent and a guardianship transfer, that Duke remain on site for the remainder of Ray's care if a responsible party agreed to take legal and financial responsibility for him. Lucas didn't hesitate before he agreed to be that party. He had buried 2 working dogs and watched a third retire into old age beside him. And he understood, better than most people in that hallway could, exactly what it cost to lose the partner who had carried you through the parts of your life nobody else had been there for. Signing his name to Duke's guardianship felt less like a decision than a continuation of something he had already spent 16 years learning how to do. Wade, informed of the hold by Diane Hess that afternoon, called the hospice administrator directly and pushed back hard, arguing that the delay was holding up the house sale and that he had already signed valid paperwork that morning. The administrator, to her credit, told him the medical hold took precedence and would remain in place until the guardianship transfer was either approved or denied by end of day. Wade hung up the call loudly enough that 2 nurses in the hallway heard him say, to no one in particular, that this was exactly the kind of complication he had been trying to avoid. The animal control officer, a heavy-set man named Mike Dunbar, who had clearly done this exact job too many times to enjoy it, came to the room at 4 o'clock with his clipboard and a leash he hadn't yet taken out of his jacket pocket. "I've got a signed authorization and a removal order," he told Lucas quietly, in the hallway, out of Ray's earshot. I don't love this part of the job, but if there's no superseding paperwork in the system by end of business, I don't have a choice. I have to take him. There's a medical hold, Lucas said. Renee Castillo filed it an hour ago. I don't see it in my system yet. Until I do, the original order stands. Dunbar's voice wasn't unkind, but it wasn't going to bend without something official behind it either. I'll give you until 5. After that, I've got 3 more calls tonight and a supervisor who's already asked me twice why this one's running long. Lucas went back into the room and found Ray awake, his breathing more labored than it had been an hour earlier, one hand resting on Duke's head where the dog lay pressed against him, unmoving, refusing to so much as lift his head when Dunbar's voice carried faintly from the hallway. Ray's eyes found Lucas's face and searched it for an answer before Lucas had one to give him. "They're not taking him today," Lucas said, with more certainty in his voice than he currently possessed. "I promise you that." Ray's hand tightened in Duke's fur, and for the first time since Lucas had walked into the room that afternoon, the old man closed his eyes, not in defeat, but in something closer to the particular exhausted trust of a man choosing, one more time, to believe somebody. At 4:50, with 5 minutes left on Dunbar's deadline, Duke lifted his head off the bed for the first time in an hour, ears forward, eyes fixed on the doorway where footsteps were approaching fast down the hall. He did not growl. He simply rose, stiff hip and all, positioned himself at the foot of Ray's bed facing the door, and would not be moved, not by Dunbar's gentle attempt to clip a leash to his collar, not by Ray's own weak hand trying to call him back. Rex, standing beside Lucas in the doorway, mirrored the posture exactly. The 2 dogs forming a line neither man in the hallway seemed willing to cross. Renee Castillo arrived at the doorway out of breath, a folder in her hand, 30 seconds before Dunbar's deadline expired. "The guardianship transfer is approved," she said, handing the paperwork to Dunbar first. "Signed by the medical director, countersigned by Mr. Tobin, and Lucas Bishop is now Duke's legal guardian of record, effective immediately, with continued visitation rights for Mr. Tobin for the remainder of his care." Dunbar read it carefully, checked a signature against his clipboard, and exhaled in a way that looked almost like relief. "This supersedes the original order. I'm not taking the dog." Wade pushed past Diane Hess into the hallway just as Dunbar finished speaking, his face flushed with the particular anger of a man who had expected an easy afternoon and gotten a complicated one instead. "This is insane. I have a signed authorization. I have power of attorney over his affairs. You have power of attorney over his finances," Renee said evenly, "not over a medically documented therapeutic relationship his physician put on record 18 months ago. That paperwork exists independent of anything you signed this morning. He's a dog. It's a house. I don't understand why this is so complicated." Wade's voice had lost whatever composure it started the conversation with. Lucas stepped into the hallway then, his voice quiet, the same level calm he had used in command briefings for 16 years. "It's not complicated, Mr. Pemberton. Your great-uncle spent 2 tours walking through jungle with a dog who kept him alive when nobody else could. He spent the last 3 years of his life with another one doing exactly the same thing in a different way, and the only thing he has asked for in the time he has left is that he not lose that too. You didn't have to understand that. You just had to not stand in the way of it." Wade looked at the 2 dogs still standing at the foot of the bed, at Ray watching the hallway with his hand pressed weakly against his chest, at the small crowd of nurses who had gathered without quite meaning to, and were no longer pretending not to listen. Whatever he had intended to say next, he didn't say it. He turned, instead, and walked back down the hallway toward the lobby, and nobody in the room made any effort to call him back. Dunbar tipped his cap toward Ray on his way out, the leash still folded in his jacket pocket, untouched. "Take care of him," he said to Lucas, and meant it. Ray Tobin passed away 17 days later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, with Lucas in the chair beside his bed and Duke pressed against his side, exactly where he had slept every night for the past 3 years. He went peacefully, the nurses said afterward, in the particular way that comes to people who have settled, somewhere in their final days, whatever they were most afraid of losing. Wade Pemberton inherited the house and sold it within 2 months, exactly as planned, though the local paper's brief story about Ray's service and the standoff over Duke had circulated through Millbrook widely enough that he chose to handle the closing through a lawyer instead of showing his face at the property himself. Duke lived with Lucas after that, in the house Lucas had shared with Koa for years before, and Rex and Duke settled into a quiet, easy companionship that needed no introduction between them. The bad hip slowed Duke down some mornings, but Lucas had learned a long time ago how to build a life around a working dog's old wounds, and neither of them seemed to mind the slower pace of it. Lucas kept visiting the hospice with both dogs most weeks, the way he always had, and most visits now, before he left, he stopped by the small memorial garden out back, where a paver near the fence line carried Ray Tobin's name and dates, and, beneath them, 4 words the hospice staff had asked Lucas to choose. Walked point. Came home loved. Sometimes the last thing a person asks for isn't more time. It's the simple assurance that the ones who love them faithfully won't be left behind, abandoned, or forgotten the moment they are gone. Ray Tobin spent 2 tours trusting a dog to walk ahead of him through danger he couldn't see coming. He spent his final weeks trusting one more person to do the same thing in a hospital hallway. Loyalty, in lives as ordinary and overlooked as this one, is rarely loud. It is a dog who will not leave a bedside. It is a stranger who will not let a clock run out on a promise. God does not always answer a dying man's last request with more time. Sometimes, he answers it with the right person standing close enough to hear him ask. If Ray and Duke's story touched your heart tonight, share it with someone who still believes that loyalty like this deserves to be protected until the very end. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever loved a dog enough to understand exactly what Ray was asking for in that hospital room. We would love to hear about it, too. And if you believe in stories of service, faithfulness, and the bonds that outlast everything else, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and grant you, when your own time comes, someone faithful enough to stand beside you the way Duke stood beside Ray.